To Sydney now, where the Catholic Archbishop Anthony Fisher has warned people, quite rightly, this is not something that will be news to anyone who watches Sky News. He's warned that the role of religion in Australia is under attack. Let's not hear it from me, let's hear it from him. Here he was speaking earlier on Credlin this evening.
We've seen a series of cases where an archbishop was dragged before a tribunal for teaching what his church teaches about marriage, where a guy lost his job as a leader of a bank because of the church he belonged to. We've had pressures from governments to implement some radical sexuality and gender programs in some states, on hospitals to provide abortions, even if they're church hospitals, or euthanasia. And now there's this trend in government reports. Now, the Law Reform Commission one is obviously hostile to faith schools, but it's not alone. We had one from the Productivity Commission recently, which was against people who make donations to church building, school building funds, having tax deductibility.
This is, of course, very topical since the Albanese government has already told the opposition we're only going to bring up this whole Religious Discrimination Act type bill unless you guys support us, therefore putting it on to them, the responsibility of the government. We already know that they're looking at stripping back any religious schools' rights under the Sex Discrimination Act and then saying, no, don't worry, we'll cover it off, whatever rights are left for you guys in said new Religious Discrimination Act. Now, it's all very murky, and anyone who's read the fine print in either the Act or this supposed bill knows that it's anything but granting freedoms to religious institutions. And again, as I always say whenever this comes up again, who made you guys the boss of what religious bodies can and can't believe and practice, which is what the Archbishop is very politely saying, being like, you guys don't get to put our noose around our necks saying when and where and why we can gather, in what manner and to do what.
It's interesting we're talking about this right after laughing about the CIA going woke and so on and so forth. Anyone who still believes that the state is neutral is obviously not paying attention, because the state has values, ethics and core beliefs. They are diversity, inclusion, equity, and you look at something like LGBTQ, right? So
state religion.
You're not allowed to say that homosexuality is a sin, or you'll be punted from rugby union, or you'll be taken to the discrimination tribunal like Justin Porteous, the Archbishop of Hobart, was. Well, that's a belief, but it's increasingly a belief that's held by the state, and the state enforces its belief upon everybody, including religious institutions. There was a time many decades ago when Christianity was regarded as a public good, and it was that was not a controversial thing. Then it was sort of neutral. These days, Christianity is increasingly regarded by the state as harmful, and there'll come a day where it's regarded as dangerous. There's a quote from Francis George, who was the Archbishop of Chicago. He said to a gathering of priests a few years ago, "I expect to die in my bed. My successor will die in prison. His successor will die a martyr in the public square, and his successor will pick up the shards of a ruined society and slowly help to rebuild civilization, as the church has done so often in human history." Now, when he said that a few years ago, I think people thought he was sort of exaggerating. But you look at the way the Western world is going and how Christians are increasingly being pushed out of the public square, out of corporate jobs, as Anthony Fisher described there with bank officials. You're an AFL fan. You would have followed Andrew Thorburn, who was kicked out of his Essendon job. You can well imagine a day where it's almost impossible to espouse Christian beliefs, which 5 minutes ago were non-controversial.
Well, it already is.
And keep your job.
It already is.
And this is why I have such an issue with legislating rights, anyone's rights, because one person's rights will always impinge upon someone else's rights. Rights should just exist. They don't need to be legislated. Everything is legal until it is made illegal. Religious freedom and any other freedom should not be legislated, but it should never be legislated against. That is the situation in which you have fundamental rights, but They don't do that.
And who are they legislating against?
Correct.
It's always the
Yes.
faith-based fill in the gap. And what I want to know, just before we go to a break, because I know that expression, is what are you going to do? Because there's billions of us, Christians, Catholics, Muslims, with a lot of things we are on a unity ticket sometimes when it comes to values-based, faith-based issues, and the Jewish people. When it comes to especially LGBTIQ things, which is what most of this legislation, putting the nails in us and trying to protect their rights, speak to. We're the ones on a unity ticket, and there's billions of us, and we're going nowhere. So it's not going to work. Try your hardest, do your darndest. It's not going to work.